Coming up, police under fire. The shooting of unarmed black men continue to make headlines, and 1 of every 3 black men in the United States will see the inside of a jail cell in their lifetimes.
And diversity in the faculty. We'll sit down with several American University professors to find out what it's like to be a minority professor on a predominantly white campus. District Wire News starts right now. Welcome to a special edition of District Wire News, a conversation about race at American University. For the next hour, we're going to be discussing a variety of topics in the context of race. We'll look at gentrification and the changing face and landscape of Washington, D.C., formerly known as Chocolate City.
We're also going to be looking at diversity among students here on the campus of American University. And we'll take a quick moment with professors about AU's diversity and faculty. But first, we look at drug laws. Most people in jails and prisons are there for drugs. In Washington, D.C., marijuana was recently legalized after a fight between the mayor and some members of Congress. Will this mean a change for the disproportionate number of black men arrested in D.C.? Amber Liu has more.
White Americans are more likely than black Americans to have used illegal drugs, but blacks are more likely to go to prison for drug offenses. In past 3 decades, arrests of blacks have increased for drug-related crimes. As of 2011, drug crimes comprised 14% of all arrests. Brookings Institute found that black Americans are more than 3 times more likely to be arrested for selling drugs and more than 2 times more likely to be arrested for buying drugs.
What we think this has to do with is the war on drugs and the policing tactics, which essentially use very aggressive enforcement tactics on black communities. One important thing that MPD can do is to acknowledge that the public at large here in the district is really not happy with this type of policing and this racial profiling of entire communities, and start to really look at their strategies and tactics.
However, according to a survey in 2011 from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, about 20% of whites have used cocaine compared with 10% of blacks and Latinos. For young people aged 18 to 25, white usage rate of marijuana are higher. Amber Liu for District Wire News.
Shootings have put a media spotlight on racism in the criminal justice system. Protests nationwide began after the police shot and killed unarmed teenager Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Protests grew even stronger after a video captured a New York policeman choking Aaron Garner to death in New York. The number of unarmed black men killed by police has suddenly become a hot topic and puts a spotlight not only on police, but on racism in the criminal justice system as a whole.
Last year, USA Today found that black people are arrested at a rate about 3 times higher than other races. Blacks and Latinos make up about 1/3 of the general population, but they are 2/3 of the people in United States prisons.
Here to talk about the history and causes of racial disparities in the criminal justice system is Nazgol Ghandnoosh of Sentencing Project. She has written extensively about these issues. Dr. Ghandnoosh, thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to take a look at one of the graphics that you had in your report, and it shows the number of people that would be arrested if they were born in 2001. And the numbers were astounding. It showed that white men were said to be arrested 1 in 17 men. For Latinos and black men, it was astoundingly different. Latinos, it was 1 in every 6, and African American men, it was 1 in every 3. So can you just talk about what goes into those numbers besides drug laws?
Sure. That graphic actually is showing something worse than arrest. It's showing the likelihood that someone will go to prison at some point in their lives. So people generally look at one of 2 explanations for this. They either think that the cause is prejudice and bias among criminal justice professionals, or they think that the cause is differential crime rates. The truth is, both of these explanations have something to do with understanding the overrepresentation of people of color in the justice system, but it's more complex than that. It has to do with not just individual bias among criminal justice professionals that are overtly biased, but also implicit bias among people that mean well but unconsciously create biased outcomes in their work. And it also has to do with criminal justice policies that have a disparate racial impact on people of color.
And you talk about the bias, and time again with the shootings and everything that we've seen in the media about the killings of these unarmed black men, we've seen that the number of police academies don't really have that many African American men working for them. How does that have an impact on the community that they serve when the police department doesn't look anything like the community that they're in?
You know, that's important for so many reasons, because we want all aspects of our society, especially professional positions, to represent broader communities that they're serving. But you know, the truth is that actually the research doesn't show that just having racial diversity fixes this problem. It's important, it's an important goal to be promoting, but it's not sufficient, because a large part of the problem is organizational policies in place, like for example, broken windows policing in New York City, which does not have evidence supporting it as an effective police program to fight crime. In places like Ferguson, Missouri, there was the problem of municipal courts using traffic tickets and throwing people into jail as a result of unpaid police fines as a way of raising revenues. And so these are the kinds of broader systemic problems that go beyond individual officer discretion.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about crime and race and sort of the relationship, especially within the media, and what's actually playing out within the jail system. So according to the US Census, blacks and Latinos make about 30% of the population. But when we look at the flip side, for those who are actually imprisoned in the US, it's about 58%. So this disparity also seems to exist within the media, right? When we look at crimes and we look at reports on crimes, you almost always see people of color. So do both of these instances feed into each other, or is it just sort of that the media is actually fueling what seems to be playing out in terms of actual criminal policing?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that both parts of what you said are true. We know that especially for the most serious violent crimes, there are racial disparities in rates of committing these crimes. Like for example, homicides. There's a higher rate of both offending and victimization among African Americans. And that has to do with concentrated urban poverty. If you put anybody into these kinds of circumstances and you throw in guns, you're going to have high homicide rates. So that's part of the explanation. But the truth is that research has been done on media coverage of crimes, and both in print media and on television, there's often an exaggeration, both in terms of the quantity and how often people of color are represented, but also in quality in the way that they're represented. More often, you might see a white criminal defendant in a suit, named, and so on. It presents a very different portrait of the person than you would see of people of color that are more often presented not dressed in suits, without even being named. And so it creates a very different impression. So what I described was a disparity in the most serious kinds of crimes. When you go towards the other end of the spectrum, less serious offenses, the disparity is not quite as severe. And in particular with drug offenses, we know that people of color and whites use and sell drugs at similar rates, but our criminal justice system doesn't reflect that truth at all.
I think, and this is sort of the argument that I think a lot of sort of media outlets pull, kind of, and it may be playing along the lines of devil's advocate, but one would say that if someone commits a crime, they commit a crime, and they have to go through the criminal justice system as is, and if they happen to be black, white, it doesn't necessarily change the fact that a crime has been committed. Is there a problem in the way, in thinking sort of in that way, that if you're kind of bypassing maybe the racial component, will this create an issue in terms of furthering the perception of what actually plays out in what we see in the media.
Right, so I think that the argument isn't that, we certainly should be holding people accountable, but we don't want to have a society where we have uneven enforcement of laws. So today is 420. A lot of people are excited about it, especially on places like college campuses. But on a college campus, you don't have to worry about being stopped by a police officer and searched. Most college students don't have to worry about that. If you're in a low-income community, you have a much greater risk of chance of being stopped and searched by a police officer, and the same marijuana that you could freely carry around on a college campus without getting into trouble is going to is going to send you through the criminal justice system and create problems for you.
Right. So what we'd like to do at this point is open it up to the audience. If there's anybody who would like to ask a question sort of about media perception, about general crime reporting, we would love to go ahead and hear it.
Jonathan Hunter has the microphone and he will be standing in the back. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask. We have one in the front.
Hi, my name is David Curtis. I am a representative of American University's Black Student Alliance, and I just want to thank everyone who's a part of this discussion, and just say that you guys are doing awesome work. And the question that I have for, I guess anyone, specifically the representative from the Sentencing Project, we understand and we know from your talk that the problem is not only represented with implicit bias, but it's also the organizational structure of law enforcement. So what can citizens and constituents of these cities where law enforcement is not behaving in a way that is equitable to all citizens, what can the constituents do specifically to advocate for a more transparent and a more fair law enforcement system within our communities?
That's a great question. I mean, in terms of transparency, we know that broken windows policing, for example, in New York City, or the disparate rates of traffic stops in Ferguson, and the fact that these stops were being used as a source of revenue, this has been information that's been known and posted on government websites every year, updated information on these disparities. So we've had the transparency. What we haven't had has been pressure to do something about this. And so that can come from calling your legislator and letting them know what you think about the situation. For example, in New York City, stop and frisk stops were dramatically reduced as a result of a lawsuit. So these are some of the possibilities.
Thank you.
Great. Dr. Ghandnoosh, we thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Coming up after the break, the city once known as Chocolate City is changing. What does that mean for longtime DC residents? Will the elderly be pushed out of the city? And where is the city gentrifying? We'll take a look at a filmmaker who is working to give a voice to all people who live in Washington, DC.